Thank you so much. We'll take questions from the audience at the 2 microphones so we can get you on the audio for the video. And here is the coveted Cafe Sai mug to match Giacomo's from last month. Match set for your home. Thank you so much. All right. We'll alternate.
I think my contact information is on your website, so feel free to, so feel free to email, ask questions if you're needing to run off. Okay.
A bunch of questions. What has the population changed since World War II been? And what is the density? And do they have agriculture on these islands? And then there's more.
Okay, so yes, they do have agriculture on the islands. They grow taro, they grow breadfruit, they grow bananas. Mostly that's their main crops, but they also grow tobacco on some islands, and so there's other crops that they grow. The population today in Yap State is right around 11,000, and about 4,500 of those are outer island people. That population actually has gone down in the past 6 years since the last census, a little bit. And it is on some of the islands, actually, we don't really know what the historical populations were, but some evidence shows that on some of those islands it was actually higher. So it's probably different. Different islands were inhabited than they are today. But evidence shows that probably reefs were supporting fairly large populations of people historically, which is one of the reasons why it's an important point. We really believe it's important not to blame the people, but instead to focus on the practices which are causing problems. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Basically, it's not a population-driven problem. What's a typical elevation above sea level?
So there's the elephant in the room, is sea level rise. The Yap itself is considered a high island, as is Faiz. So Yap is gosh, I forget what the highest part of Yap is, but it's many meters. It's high island. It's got mountains in it. Faiz is lower, but it's about 50, I think. And the other islands are like anywhere between 0 and minus 1. No, but they're just right at sea level. They are just above sea level. And in fact, their taro patches are currently being inundated by salt water because the lens is being disrupted by sea level rise.
Thank you.
I had a question about dynamite fishing. I have been in that part of the world, and I know that they've done that. Is that kind of still going on, or is it gone?
So, good question. In the Yap Islands, it is not a practice and never has been. They did it once when they discovered some unexploded ordnances, and the local people, so the Navy went out to take care of that, and the local people said, hey, if you're going to detonate those things, why not do it over here and we'll catch the fish? So there's evidence of it having happened once or twice. In Chuk, though, it's actually a relatively pervasive technique, and it's a real problem. So our next, we've been asked by Chuk to come out and work with people out there because that's devastating, and those reefs just simply will not recover from that. So that's a really important point. But in Yap, it's not used, and they don't allow it. Yeah, so the communities really understand it, and they don't allow it.
Yeah. If you take a sort of a medium forecast of the rise in sea level, and in view of how communications and so forth in the 21st century are improving, would you like to kind of make a forecast as what the Federation might look like 200 years from now?
No.
No?
Well, it's a really important question, but it's one that I think the jury is still out on the rate at which these things are happening. And my guess is that the actual rise of sea level will be less problematic than the frequency of storms that accompanies sea level rise. So those storms can be really devastating to reefs and to islands and communities. And so my guess would be that that's going to be a bigger problem than the slow but steady rise in sea level, which is occurring. We can see it all over these islands. It is definitely occurring, and the people are well aware of it. So they know, and many of them are actually planning ahead.
I was also thinking about the effect of the modern world on the people who live there, because they know a lot more about it now than they did 100 years ago.
Right. And I'll say one thing about the effect of modern the modern world on the people out there, they are still quite traditional. Meaning, if you offer them a nice spear gun, are they going to take it? For sure, because it'll help them catch fish. And no more than you would take a nice new cell phone because it does things faster, right? I mean, it's a tool for them. So yes, they're going to do that. But you want to come in and tell them how to dress and tell them, how to do their traditions and cultures. No, they will ask you to go home. So they're very protective of their culture. And so they are very savvy about that. And I'll tell you one really important thing that I didn't bring up here, but that's illustrative of that for me, is that there are other governments that are pushing hard to get access to Yap waters for fish, which amazes me because there aren't enough fish even to feed the people, and for tourism. And one of these countries is China. They're pushing very, very hard. In fact, the Chinese have made the sweet deal with the Yappies that they will bring in economic growth if Yap will turn over management of their fisheries. I don't know how that's going to work. But the outer islanders, who are autonomously governed, have said no, at least up until now. So they are really wary of that, and they understand that there's a lot of stuff that might come along with that, and they don't want to move forward until they understand it much more carefully. So they are very careful people.
Thank you so much for your presentation at a level I could understand. I've got a couple quick questions. I'll try to minimize my words. Did you notice any conflict in what you were trying to share, convey, suggest with their traditions and way of life? Did you have to incentivize any kind of cooperation? Did you find any new species, and did you have any plan in which you could have them share with you any new species? Garbage. It seems like there's always stuff being imported. Are there landfills, dumps there, or is there a method to take this garbage off and bring it here instead, or whatever, not dump it in the ocean? And the sea level, in addition to encroaching on the land, it would also be causing, I guess, these reefs to be, instead of 10 or 20 feet now, 20 or 30 feet under the surface. And how would that affect it? So wait, that's at least 2 hours worth of answers there. But let me hit the first ones if I can here. So, needing cooperation, no, because it's not my plan. So I'm not asking them to cooperate with what we are developing. I'm suggesting to them, I'm validating for them that they have problems. So they're telling me we have problems, and I can look at the reef and I can say, yeah, you do. I can see it right here. So no, and I'm actually quite opposed to incentivized conservation, because incentivized conservation, although there is a place for it, so I don't want to poo-poo the whole thing, all right? There is a place for it. But to incentivize conservation, you usually will have a window, which is the incentive window. And when the money runs out or the grant goes away, then the people are left thinking, okay, so next. And so it's not really something that they now own. So that said, we do pay a few people on those islands for the time and effort they're putting into organizing it. It's a tremendous amount of work that they're doing out there, and some of them are doing that instead of other jobs. Like John Wilmall spends way more time than I, and it's not very much money. Let me tell you, it would make you choke if you knew how much. It's basically pennies, right? But for them, it means they can't go do other things. They can't work on the electricity projects or do whatever else they might do. So, but no, we're not throwing money around the community saying this is why you should be doing conservation. Not at all. And in fact, that was one of my messages when I went there to them. I said, this is your thing. I can help you, I think, and I will try to help you. But I'm not going to do anything in terms of your plans. And then, what effect will sea level rise have on the reef? So that's a question that's under a lot of study right now. How fast do corals adapt and change? And it looks like some can actually adapt pretty quickly. And that's one of the things we may think is driving this new species of coral. So yes, we did find a new species of fish and a new species of coral so far. This may be a species that is simply one that does well under new conditions compared to everybody else. So it's basic competition. So this is a coral that we think may do well under, and we haven't done the research to know this yet, so I'm not basing this on anything solid, right? But this is part of a genus of corals, and there are others in this genus that tend to respond quite well to especially acidification. And like a weed in a garden, the conditions change and boom, all of a sudden you have all these weeds that grow because they've done well and everything else starts to go. So could be happening out here. We're not sure, but could be. So sea level rise and acidification will have these kinds of effects. Some corals will be able to adapt and change. Some will do well, and others will probably perish. That's what we believe will happen. Will the entire reef die and the whole system go to heck? I don't know. I kind of doubt that. Just personally, simply knowing how many changes there have been over the last billions of years, and in the case of corals, they've come and gone 5 times in history, like gone, extinct, and come back. And so they're pretty, these systems are pretty resilient in their own way. Will it change? Definitely. It is changing. Yes, it is changing. That's my optimistic answer.
Thank you for the talk. It's very inspirational work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Earlier on, you showed a slide with sea turtle populations, I believe. And just a question about baselines. How confident are we in the accuracy of the pre-European survey data?
Oh, not very. Because, we don't really, most of those data, by the way, come from ship's logs. So we can see which were quite accurate. So we can see where the ships went, and we could see how many turtles they gathered for food, which is what they usually gathered them for. And from this, we could extrapolate the size of the rookeries and where the rookeries were, so where the ships were. So from this data, actually, we do have a pretty good confidence in, because, if they went there and saw turtles and there aren't some today, then we know that's changed. So some of it, though, requires a fair amount of modeling and a fair amount of, trying to, it's a bit of educated guesswork, let's say. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for a great talk. I was so impressed to see an actual real-world application of the conversion of plastic into fuel. I've seen it in labs. I didn't know it existed anywhere, and this is really encouraging. I had 2 questions. One is about the statement you made about when a major chief dies, it's followed by food insecurity. Why is that? And also in these invasive coral species, does it seem that they're only there because of the presence of the debris from our Navy with the steel ships and all the stuff that's in it? And are they usable by fish or any other organisms? Or are they toxic like some plants are?
So good questions. And thank you for your feedback on the talk and on the work. And if you want to get involved, we do have a website, so please feel free. So the plastics, the plastic to fuel converter, Captain Homer is here, and his organization, the Clean Oceans Project, is working on that. So it is not yet out there. There is a unit in Palau, but not in Yap. So I'm working with Homer out here, and we're trying to get that unit to the outer islands. It hasn't happened yet, but it does exist, which is really exciting, I think. And then your question about the corals, they are not toxic as far as we can tell. The fish seem to be less diverse and less abundant in the areas where that coral is. And the people tell us that it has covered octopus holes and it's covered clam habitat, and it's basically taking away other food for them. So they don't like it. But is it better than a rubble or algae-covered reef? My instinct as an ecologist says probably. Now, I'm not going to say yes, because corals are better. Hard cover is better than algae. But my instinct tells me it probably is. So one thing they wanted to know from us is, should we kill it? Should we eradicate it, break it up? And first of all, definitely not, because it fragments. And so if you tear it and throw it, it grows again. So don't touch it, we told them. And, probably it is habitat for juvenile fish at the very least. So it's probably better than nothing. Although I have to say the jury's out on that stuff. We're studying it. We don't really understand it yet. We're just beginning to understand it. I forget the
And
other
then
question.
food insecurity following
Oh,
the
yeah.
death.
So that's a really good question, and I don't know the answer. But my guess is, in talking to people, so, there's a whole piece of this that we haven't talked about, which is the social science side of it. And I'm not a social scientist, although I've had some background in social science. How to talk to people and how to get information and like this. It can be tricky because they often don't give direct answers. They'll tell stories about things. So my take on the food insecurity piece is the closure of the reefs is out of respect for the person who passed. because when the reef is closed, you're thinking about them because you can't fish there. I mean, they come up in your thoughts a lot. And so it's out of respect for the person who passed. And I believe also when a new chief comes on, it's a period of sort of rebirth in a way. There's food, things are good, it's a good time, it's a time of growth. So from listening to people, it seems like those are maybe the roots to that. That it's not meant to punish people, it's meant more to create an aura of respect and a replenishment for the future. It seems like that's how it's looked at. But I'm not going to back that up with hard data either, because I didn't interview everybody about the closure of their reefs. But we did talk to a lot of people about them.
Yes, two questions. You've talked a lot about the rise of the ocean. Can you quantify that? And secondly, what language do these people speak?
The rise of sea level can be quantified. I can't do it for you because it's actually different in different places in the world. In some places it's millimeters, in some it's centimeters. It depends on where you are, melting of ice, expansion. So the heat expands the oceans, which is a large part of what causes it to rise. So it's different in different parts of the world. And so I'm not, and I don't have at my fingertips the actual numbers for Micronesia. Although, well, I don't know if the numbers for Micronesia exist, but the numbers for regions in the Pacific do exist. I know that. So you can find data for regions in the Pacific on actual quantitative data for sea level rise. They do exist. And the other question was languages. They all speak, each island speaks a different dialect. It's crazy. And what's interesting is that they're all part of Yap State. And the outer islanders can all understand each other, sort of the way that, you know, in California we might be able to understand a deep Texan, kind of. But on Yap, the main island of Yap is actually completely different linguistically. So, and Satawal, which is the farthest east of the islands, is mostly more related to Chuk. So those islands linguistically are more related to the Chuk Islands than they are to the Yap main island. But they're all linguistically different. So Junior, who was traveling with us, he would get, the farther out he got, he'd get a little more insecure about the language because sometimes it's a switched letter. So an R is an S instead. And so instead of saying raga, you'd say saga, which actually in his own language is a swear word. So it became a little tricky that way. So they're quite different linguistically. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, okay. So my daughter's doing a lot of research on your work, and which is how I came across this little piece of information that grabbed my attention. Somewhere in your web pages there was the mention that when they're importing food, they're importing the white bread and the white rice and the sausages and whatever, very limited diet, and that's changing then human waste, which then that impacts the reefs. Is there anything that you're doing with helping them to control that somehow?
So
with exposure of the reef to this?
So we aren't directly doing water quality analysis, which would be required to exactly answer that. But it's, Avigdor especially, certainly the content, I mean, let's not get into details, but the waste is going to be different. And corals respond so quickly to nutrients in the water. So it's highly likely that that's causing something in the water. We just don't know exactly. We haven't quantified that yet at all. We are working with the people. Yes, we do tell them that. We do tell them that it's likely has an effect. And you can see in the data that where the villages are, not just where World War II landing sites are, but where all the villages are, you can see cyanobacteria. You can see the impact of eutrophication or nutrients in the water. And so we can show them with our data, which is actually quite powerful for them. And we do talk to them about the food, and in particular, we talk about that in the context of the importance of bringing back traditional fishing because their health is at stake. And they're having, the leading cause of death out there is diabetes and heart disease. And that's, I'm telling you right now, from Spam and white rice. And so we are working with them in the sense that the foods they used to eat are far healthier than the foods they're importing. Now that said,
the farther out we got into the outer islands, actually there isn't a lot of that imported food because it just simply doesn't get there. So I did see a lot of white rice, but the canned meat seems to fade out as you go out into the outer islands. But certainly diet shifts are important. And I can tell you one anecdotal thing, that when I could not finish my plate of Spam because I couldn't hardly even eat a bite of that stuff. And each time I left a giant pile of Spam on my plate, all the guys that I was sitting with just went nuts over it. More Spam for us, so they love that stuff. And it is really not healthy at all. Yeah.
Fukushima, what is the impact in terms of what you're seeing in Yap, the fish population, and to get real specific, sushi and sashimi?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, they don't eat a lot of raw fish.
But I'm thinking in terms of the Fukushima impact on the ocean
Right.
in general. I don't know what you've seen in Yap, but
So
curious.
there's been no hard evidence on what impact that's had. And most of the work that's being done on that is tracing the radioactivity. So in terms of fish populations, I'm just going to guess that very little. I don't think the fish populations themselves have been hit by Fukushima. It's the concentrations of radioactive isotopes in them that people are worried about. And those are being traced, and they do have them. And the fish that carry them the farthest are the tuna and the other large
Right.
pelagic fish like that. And they do travel to Yap, and they do catch them there. So my guess is they probably would be, nobody's sampling them out there as far as I know. But as so far, the levels in the fish that are being found are still quite low. So there's no big panic at the moment. Don't eat tuna fish, they're full of radioactivity. So that's not been a panic button that's been pushed yet, but it is being monitored. And as far as I know, nobody's monitoring it in Yap. So we don't know the effect. But interestingly enough, those levels are going to show up more in those pelagic fish. They don't eat a lot of those fish there. They eat mostly reef fish. Right. So they do fish for tuna. The big canning companies that used to fish out in Yap are long gone. They've overfished it. So the warehouses, like the big tuna companies, are all blocked off and shut down. So it's really all local fishing for the most part and poaching. But there's no big tuna operations anymore out there. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about coral recruitment, like having an area that is very low or very high rugosity, and then having like a very diverse coral, and how, if they're next to each other, they affect each other.
So what she's asking about is the rugosity is complexity of the reef, so how bumpy it is, basically, and how that affects coral recruitment. So baby corals like to land near other corals, for one thing. There's probably a chemical signal that's sent out by the corals. And they like to land on a pink, it's a pink algae, actually, that's a crustose algae. It's a hard surface, it's pink, and it too sends out a chemical signal to baby corals that tells them this might be a good place to start growing. So where we see a lot of that coral, we tend to see higher recruitment. And where we see higher rugosity tends to mean more corals, which are doing more breeding, which are producing more babies to land there. So those are places where we do see more recruitment. What's interesting about what she's asking is that on the reefs where the coral cover is low, which we think may be part of the problem is overfishing of those herbivorous fish, which are letting too much algae grow and stuff like this, we actually see a lot of corals recruiting there. So the system does not seem to be recruitment limited. There's seems to be plenty of baby corals around, but they aren't living, they aren't surviving when they land there. And probably that's because algae, low rugosity, flat reefs, lots of algae. It's like being a baby plant and landing in a giant field of weeds. It's like, bah, and it's too much, and then they die. So we think that this is part of the positive message, is we think that if people bring back some better fishing practices and encourage more of these herbivorous fish, which can eat down more of the algae, that actually the reefs probably can begin to recover, just looking at the numbers of corals that are recruiting to those reefs, but not surviving.
My question is almost the same as the young ladies. Before technology hit this area, do we have any indications of the human population and how stable it was, or what kind of fluctuations there may have been, and what the causes of that could be?
So, yeah, there were stable populations out here on some of the islands up to 4,000 years. So we know they've been quite stable on many of these islands for a very long period of time. There's also evidence of some islands that used to have communities that don't anymore. And when I asked about that, we've actually visited one of those islands, the atoll of Sorol, and I asked why there's nobody living there now, and they said, well, because it's haunted. And so there's a lot of traditions and taboos that happen that cause people to do things. I don't know if long ago somebody died there. I don't know what the story is, and they seem to have forgotten it also, but they have a firm belief that it's haunted. And so they've tried to reestablish communities there. They've built nice houses out there and everything, and people will live for a few months and then they leave. So, well, part of the problem is that some of these islands have been, the Japanese, which were out along that chain prior to World War II, introduced a big monitor lizard, which is really kind of ugly. I mean, I don't know if you like lizards. I'm sorry if you do, but it's like a big one like this, you know. It's really big, and it's got big tongue, and they don't like it. It scares them. And so on some of these islands, those lizards, and especially on the ones that have been, nobody lives anymore, the populations of lizards have gotten quite big. And so when you arrive on the island, you get met by these big lizards, and it's a bit disarming. So I think that's part of it. They really don't like them, which is too bad, because actually they were introduced there for food. And I understand they taste like chicken, so, you know, it might be a good alternative. I don't know. Thank you. Thank you. So I just want to extend, please, if you're interested in the project or in any information, questions you might come to you later, please feel free to email. Our website has all the information on it. And thank you. Yeah. It comes from people, from organizations. Oh, you know, I had a funding slide on here. There. As you walk out, you can take a look at who's been funding us. The Office of Insular Affairs, David Lucille Packard Foundation. We've got Oceanic Society. Bucci gave all the guys sunglasses out there, which was great. Buy Bucci's, a good company. Santa Cruz, local company. And Sports Basement gave soccer balls. And then we have had some private donations as well from people who are interested in the project and either want to join us or follow the project.